everyone, today's mashup is all about using paste with your stencil. So turn it on and watch a whole bunch of past videos crammed all into one so you can turn it on, add some background noise while you're crafting and get tons of inspiration and ideas. Let's go. Now, pastes are something I really need to be in the mood for. Not because I don't like the look of them or I don't like playing with pastes. I'm not a big fan of drying time and I'm a little bit impatient. But when I do pull them out, I never regret it. So I got some new pastes and I wanted to play with them today. But I want to mention that all of the techniques here that I'm showing you today can be applied to any paste. The results might vary slightly, of course, depending on the properties of the paste itself, but all these techniques you can apply to any paste you like. I'm going to be showing you 5 completed cards today and several backgrounds that didn't quite make the cut, and I'll explain why. So these are the Simon Hurley solar pastes that come in 6 colors. These 6 colors also coordinate with his inks in case you have those. But you may have heard of the lunar pastes before, which are creamy, shiny, and have super bold colors. This is due to the mica in the formula. But these are solar pastes and they have an iridescent mica, which means they aren't as bold, at least not on light cardstock, but are beautiful, creamy, and elegant all the same. So let's play and see what's so great about these pastes. All right, so let's apply it to some white cardstock first to see how it looks on white cardstock. And this is something you can do truly with any paste out there and it will be just fine. The way it shows up on white cardstock will vary based on the property of the paste though. All right, ready, set, go. I love this. So this is not like glacier paste or any other paste that I've used where the gold is extremely strong, but it's got a very subtle gold tinge to it. And I really love the shine, but I love the simplicity and kind of the subtleness of it, if that makes sense. So let's set it off to dry so we can see what it looks like later. When I'm playing with my stencils like this and my pastes, I always keep just this Tupperware container with a little bit of dish soap and warm water or lukewarm water to put them in so that the paste doesn't settle and crust on my stencils. So apparently the big difference between lunar paste and solar paste is the fact that it shows up differently on dark cardstock. So on white cardstock, you get a very subtle look, but on dark cardstock, you'll get a little bit of a bolder look. It's not bold like the lunar paste. It is different, but it is very beautiful all the same. So let's apply this through a stencil with some dark blue cardstock and see what it looks like. Whether you apply it with a palette knife or something like this, like a stencil pal or anything like that, that's completely up to you and your choice. And of course, I didn't bother masking anything off and I got lines everywhere, but that's okay. We're just experimenting today. Not everything that I create when I'm experimenting and figuring out how a paste works will turn into a finished card. But it is good to know that when I try to wipe this off with my finger, a lot of it will come off, but not all of it. Now let's try over top of a ink blended background. I took 3 colors, something borrowed, Fiesta Blue, and Cummerbund. And I decided to just do a very subtle ink blend over top because I heard that when you apply these pastes that it actually picks up the color of the ink, and so I wanted to give that a try and let it dry and see what happens. So this happens with quite a few pastes, especially if you're using something like a dye ink that's water reactive, even when it is dry. You know, when you flick little water spots all over your cardstock and it reacts, that every dye ink does that. And it's no difference when I apply paste over top of ink as well. It will pick up that color and kind of seep it through. And that's what happens a lot of the times when I use something like a white embossing paste over an ink blended background, is it might not stay that super vibrant white. It's going to take on at least, at the very least, a tint of the inks that are behind it. But we won't be able to tell what it looks like until this actually dries. Next, I wanted to apply this using something other than, a standard stencil pal or a palette knife, something a little bit more subtle. So I grabbed a blending tool and I put this through the stencil. This is one of my backgrounds that I didn't really care for the way that it turned out, but I do know that I definitely can apply the paste this way with the foam and it looks really great. It doesn't put as thick of a layer of the paste on it, which can definitely be helpful if you're going for a very, very subtle look. And this, the reason why I don't like this background has a lot more to do with the stencil, I'd have to say, than actually with the pastes. Now, what about applying it with something like my finger? So I'm gonna go ahead and just wet my cardstock a little bit with a spritz or two of water, and I'm gonna put it through my die cutting machine with an embossing folder. And I love the way that this turns out. I'm so happy I switched to the Sizzix switch because it gives me the best impressions with a 3D embossing folder, which I couldn't really achieve with my previous machines. And I'm very excited about that, that I don't have to play with the sandwich so much. It's very simple and obvious. Very beautiful design, and I'm gonna apply some of this with my finger now and see how it looks. So I'm just trying to pick up as little paste as possible. So I'm just using the paste that's kind of stuck in the lid here. And I am just rubbing it on my mat first, so I have quite little amounts. And then I'm doing my best to kind of stay in the lines as best as you can. Maybe a detailed blending brush might work a little bit better for this. I'm not too sure. But I feel like with my finger, I have a little bit more control of how heavy I push down onto the cardstock rather than with a tool. So I can kind of see if am I staying on the textured part or am I actually hitting my background. In the end, it does have a beautiful shine to it, but I really couldn't tell on light cardstock anyway that there was such a difference between the colors, unless I was holding it directly up to the light, and it is a little bit too subtle for me. On dark cardstock though, it might definitely be an option, and I'm not really a messy crafter, so if I go outside the lines, I don't like it so much. So I decided to put it to the test. I'm using darker cardstock, the same design, and I'm using a blending brush to help me kind of stay in the lines and be less messy, and I'm applying the paste. I can see straight away that the green is truly a green color, even if it's on purple cardstock. It doesn't seem like the purple's affecting the true color of the paste, which is really cool. Obviously, using the purple paste, it's a little less subtle because I'm using a tone on tone or a color on color, and you get that beautiful shine though. And it's definitely a really pretty look. Now, me personally, I think if this was the look that I'm going for, a 3D embossing folder, I want some sort of shine or a metallic look to it, I'd probably use embossing ink over top and spread some perfect pearls before I would work with a paste like this because I'm not accurate enough, but overall it definitely did the job. I wanted to try out the different colors on a dark piece of cardstock. So I grabbed myself a black piece of cardstock and I'm gonna go over in the rainbow colors because they're pretty much rainbow colors that are available right now. And I'm gonna go over with my palette knife on this corner rainbow stencil that I have so I can put each paste in its own little arc. I believe though I'm only gonna have room for 5 colors and not all 6. So I've got the first 3 done here, and now we gotta wait for it to dry, and I gotta use the second part of the stencil to fill in the other arcs. Okay, so you can see the 3 colors that are completely dry here. I waited entirely for this to air dry. And then I'm gonna place my second stencil, this is a layering stencil, over top, and I'm going to add the other colors. So here are the other 2 colors. Again, just trying to get it as smooth as I can. It's not too hard to spread, I have to say. It's very creamy, but because there is no texture to it, I feel like you really have to get a smooth blend in order for it to work properly. And this was a perfect time to experiment and see, can you use a heat tool on this paste or not, or do you need to let it air dry? And my experience is you have to be very careful. If the paste is a little bit on the thicker side, it will bubble. And so it might be good to let it at least a little bit air dry and then go over with the heat tool, or and I am using the lowest setting of my heat tool, or keep the heat tool further away from your panel or maybe even behind the panel, and then really move it a lot as it's going. Me personally, I prefer to air dry in this case. And since I didn't use gold on the last one, I just wanted to show you what this one looks like on black cardstock so you can truly see all of the colors kind of in their glory, if that makes sense, on dark cardstock. And like I said, you don't need to use these pastes on dark cardstock. They do have their own properties when working on light cardstock that are very pretty and subtle. But working on dark cardstock, I think, is where they truly shine. I also used one of these stencils to show you what it looks like when you have a really large solid area, so you can make your own cardstock with the paste as well. That is definitely different than any sort of shiny gold cardstock that I've used before. Now the last thing I want to experiment with here is adding embossing powder on top of the paste. So I'm going to spread the paste over top of my stencil quickly. And what I'm going to do now is just kind of sprinkle some embossing powder over top and then heat it up and see what happens. Now, this is something for me that is probably great for mixed media artists or people who like to do maybe grunge looks or things like that. This was not my favorite technique. All right, let's check out the backgrounds and then see what's gonna make the cut. So this was the white and dark cardstock on an embossing folder, the final appearance. This was just applying it through a stencil on a dark background. Same with this one, going for a look of two different ones that are colored paste on dark cardstock. Then applying the paste here through a stencil and then adding embossing powder. I just wanted to mention as well, all of the backgrounds I'm showing now are now completely dry. So you're seeing what they look like. This is white cardstock with one of the colors. You could see the beautiful subtleness of it. And then going in with the inked background, it picked up quite a bit of the blue, especially I noticed when I tilt it. I think my stencil was a little bit dirty though, and I definitely need to apply it thicker in certain spots. And two of my favorite backgrounds here, applying the leaves here and having a lot of space where the paste went. I think these turned out amazing. So these were the backgrounds that made the cut. I just wanted to mention, what do I do with backgrounds that don't make the cut? If I feel like I can turn the background still into a card, I will just leave it and come back to it later to add a die cut to it. But if I don't, what I do is I stick it in a bin underneath my die cutting machine, and I'll use it to cut out like a sentiment die or something like that. And then I'll use it for things like letters or a sentiment, and they turn out really nice and really cool textured. And because you're breaking up the background, I find that you don't see any mistakes or flaws or anything like that. So my first card, all I did was mount the background on top of another piece of black cardstock, attach it to my card base, and add a black strip of cardstock so that I have a nice spot to focus the sentiment on. I then went ahead and attached this beautiful sentiment in black as well as in gold. I'm pretty much obsessed now with shadow dies. Anything that doesn't come with a shadow die doesn't really interest me all that much anymore. So I like to have the double look. I think that's great. And I'm sure I can find a UR somewhere in my stash, or I will just leave it as is because I think it's beautiful just the way it is. If you're like me and you love shadow dies too, you could also cut your die simply twice if it doesn't have a shadow, like I did with this high die. Unfortunately, I don't know which company made this. I can't seem to find it anymore, but I cut it out twice. And what I'll do is I'll glue the shadow to the card, and then I'll glue the other one over top, but I will offset it ever so slightly to create myself a shadow on one side of the sentiment. And I think that that looks just fine as well. All right, for the next card, I wanted to work again with some more gold. I love gold. And I'm going to use the dandelion background that I had done with the stencil. And I'm going to die cut a bunch of these leaves and floral and faunas out of some vellum as well as some gold cardstock. And then I just wrapped some white twine as well as some gold metallic thread around my card, and I secured it on the back of the card panel using some regular Scotch tape because I'm going to be gluing this onto a card base at some point. It's not a big deal to just glue this down with a piece of tape. And my apologies for being a little bit off screen here. You can still see what I'm doing though. I'm just arranging all of those little pieces that I have here. And I decided to experiment a little bit and try to attach these with a wax seal. I really like the wax seal look these days, but it didn't turn out the first time so well, so I tried to pick as much of the wax seal off as possible while it was still kind of warm. So then I decided to create the seal actually off of my card because the twine actually made it kind of flick out and it didn't work so well. So I melted my wax, stuck my wax seal in, let it cool for a second or two, pulled it up, and then I had my wax seal that I could attach with a piece of double-sided tape. That seemed to work a whole lot better and was a lot more accurate. I'm new to the wax seal game. I have a couple of wax seals that I had purchased on Amazon before. This specific kit here is from Spellbinders, but they're a lot of fun and I can see myself using them in the future for embellishments or sealing envelopes, of course. And I absolutely love the way that this card turned out. It's so cool. Even though the happy birthday, I realized afterwards, is supposed to go kind of off to the side with the happy birthday on the left and right and not so much up and down. Now this background here, all I did was attach it to a white card base. I grabbed a sentiment out of my box that's full of sentiments that I could just grab and go, and I attached this here and was done with the card. And the last background, I simply added a high dye to the background, and I think it all looks fantastic. Embellishing is always my last step when it comes to cards. Usually I will have all my embellishments out, any sort of coordinating sequins or confetti or anything like that, and I will just do them all at the same time. It's very rare that I'll sit down and just create one card. Usually I'm doing either a certain technique or I'm grabbing a certain tool like paste and I'm making a whole bunch of cards to go with it. So I always kind of just have these at the end and I just embellish when I'm ready to go. Now, I'd love to see your cards that you're creating with your pastes. Be sure to tag me at Justine Hovey over on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're posting your cards. I'd love to see them. And remember, you don't need these specific pastes to get great looks. Hey everyone, it's Justine, and today I'm showing you a technique video on products that work both on black and white cardstock. Let's dive straight into the techniques that I want to show you today, and I will be completing my cards with sentiments of encouragement and inspiration. So first we're going to start off with crackle mousse, and crackle mousse or any type of paste really generally works with this technique. So I'm going to be using a really intricate stencil. You can choose whichever stencil you like. Keep in mind that the thicker your crackle mousse is, the more it's going to crack. So I'm doing a pretty thin layer on mine because I want some minor detail, but I don't want it overtaking the power of the intricacy of the stencil. So I'm using my stencil to apply this smoothly to my cardstock, both the black and the white, and I'm just wiping along. I'm also going to go ahead and fill in that area at the top that's just plain cardstock because I think it'll give it a little bit of a cool look. Now keep in mind when you're doing this on black and white cardstock, the color of your paste, of course, you're going to get a more dramatic looking effect on black and white cards using bright and vibrant colors versus using maybe white or black, because that won't show up as well on the other type of the cardstock. Not that that really matters, you'll get a really pretty tone on tone look anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the stencil now. You'll see how intricate and gorgeous that turned out, and I'm going to leave that to dry. Hey everyone, it's Justine and welcome to another video tutorial. Today I am guest designing for Stencil Girl, and I'm going to be using some of her stencils today to create some fun backgrounds. I'm going to start off with the Inky Circle stencil, and I'm using various colors of distress ink. I'm using Broken China, Peacock Feathers, Salty Ocean, and Faded Jeans to create this background. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take the stencil and move it slightly to the bottom right side, just so it's slightly off center, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to redo all of these stencils again by using the same colors, but I'm going to try and use different colors for each circle than I did on the previous one. The inks that I am using are oxide inks, so I find them slightly more vibrant than the original distress inks, and they just react to water in a different way. But I'm not going to be using water, so you could use any type of inks for this really. So once that was finished, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to stamp an image. I am using the Sparkle in the Rain stamp from Visible Image, and I love the solid images and the effect they have on these backgrounds. Now because I'm using oxide ink, the oxide ink is going to repel the black ink a little bit. So you're going to see a little bit of those circles show up in the black when you're stamping. If you don't want this to happen, I personally think it looks really cool, you could just use plain distress inks instead of the oxide inks. And that would have no issue whatsoever. So I'm just making sure that this is nice and inked up using some VersaFine ink, and I'm going to stamp this down onto the background. And for me personally, whenever I am doing one of these solid images, I personally really like to go over the image twice just to get any sort of white spots out of the way there. And my Misty Stamp Positioner here allows me to do that and stamp in the same spot each time. Alright, so now that that's finished, I'm going to set it off to the side and I'm going to do another background technique with another stencil. Now for this one here, I'm going to show you how to do it using the Born to Perform stamp from Visible Image. And these ones here I'm going to show you because I'm going to be stamping first, and I'm going to be using some Nouveau Mousse to cover up the stencil. Now I'm going to go for the same idea as the first stamp. I'm going to put it in the top left-hand corner so that I could have the feet stick out a little bit at the bottom. And I'm going to ink that up again using the VersaFine ink. So I'm just going to speed it up here a little bit so that you get the impression without having to sit for a long period of time. So I did go ahead and double stamp that off screen. Then what I did was I cut out a piece of masking paper. So this is just a scrap piece of masking paper. You can see I've used it many times before. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp the ballerina. This is Inka Dinka Doo masking paper, which means that it has a sticky back to it that is covered by a blue paper at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out this ballerina, but when I'm cutting it out, I'm actually going to be avoiding all of those splatter marks around her tutu, all that detail there. So I'm just going to go along the legs and then just do a plain circle or a half circle around the tutu. That way it doesn't take very long. Once that is all finished being done and cut out, I'm going to put that over top of the original image. This is going to protect the image while I'm adding my mousse to it. So for the stencil, that is an Art Deco flower medallion stencil by Stencil Girl, and I absolutely love the detail on it. So I'm going to add some Post-it tape. I'm going to stick it down to my craft mat as well as from the back of my card onto the stencil. And I'm going to use this mousse here to cover my stencil. I've had this mousse for a little while, so it has been sitting there for a little bit. I noticed it's not as smooth as the previous time that I used it, but once I started working with it, it became really malleable again, and it was no problem using it. So I'm just going along the circle here and I'm just flattening it out each time so that I have a nice even surface. So I scrape down to make it smooth each time. And I'm just going to remove the stencil here and let it dry. Now, so once I remove the stencil, obviously I still need to remove the mask as well. And if you have any sort of areas that got the mousse you don't want it, you can grab your palette knife and you could just clean that up. And usually it's not an issue. So now I have the ballerina poking out here and it's fully black against the background, so that's a nice way to mask it. I ended up doing a third card as well. While I fold these card bases, I'll let you know. The card bases measure 11 by 4 1/4 and are folded in half at 5 1/2. So I'm going to add my covers here onto the front. You can see I cut some of them down a little bit using a stitched rectangle die. And you can see that I actually made a third card. I used the exact same technique as the ballerina, except for the fact that I used glitter paste instead of Nouveau Mousse. I'll link to it below in the video description, but it's the same process, so I didn't want you to get a little bit bored. And the stamps I used for that are the Rock Out as well as the Guitars Small Stencil from Visible Image, the stamp, and from Stencil Girl, the stencil. So now, lastly, I'm just going to add my sentiments. I'm going to be using the Go to Words stamp that has Happy Birthday in this nice script writing. My backgrounds are quite busy, so I don't want anything too fancy. So you can see I just move my cardstock up an inch each time and it stamps it out perfectly even, so it makes it much easier when I'm cutting these out. So when I add my paper trimmer here, I just mark it at 1 inch, and then I pull up and mark it at 1 inch, and it cuts each one of them exactly the same. So this is a final look at the cards here. I hope you'll check them out over on my blog. I have more information about the products used as well as links to Stencil Girl and Visible Image, and I hope you enjoyed this card tutorial. Thanks. Okay, let's get into all of the techniques. We are going to start with embossing powder, and embossing powder is something that you can use with your pastes. So I'm going to go ahead and attach my stencil to my cardstock here using some purple tape, and I'm going to mask off an area rather than doing the whole background. So for this technique, I'm going to be using embellishment mousse from Nouveau. You can use any paste. This one here is a bit of a thicker paste, but once you start working it and kind of working it with your palette knife or whatever you're using, it tends to get a little bit easier to spread and work with. So I'm just spreading it over top of the circles here on the stencil itself, and then I'm going to remove it afterwards. So I'm just making sure it's all nice and smooth. I'm pushing in my palette knife. You can see me working the paste here into all the little areas. And then when I'm done, I can just simply scrape off to make everything nice and smooth, and I can add the remaining excess paste into my jar. So I'm just going to remove my masked area here so I can remove the stencil, and then you'll see I only have 3 lines of the dots here. And as I said, you can do the whole background or whatever. It doesn't really affect this technique at all in any way. The next thing I'm going to do is you can grab any color embossing powder. I'm going to grab some gold embossing powder from Wow, and I'm going to very, very lightly sprinkle this on top of my paste. You don't want to cover everything, because if you do that, then it's just going to turn out to be gold. I wanted to have the pink and the gold showing.
Then all you do is just heat it. This will also help with drying the paste, but it'll also melt the embossing powder. And then you'll get a look that looks something like this. I finished off the card by turning it into a birthday card using a stamp from Simon Says Stamp, and I think it looks really great. The second technique focuses on double stenciling. It's one of my favorite techniques to do with inks, but I never really thought about doing it with pastes before. I'm using this stencil from Tailored Expressions. I love how it has the lines here. It's really perfect for lining up A2 size cards so you know exactly where it belongs and you don't have to worry about keeping things straight or even on either side. I'm going to be using glimmer paste for this technique, and this is a really fun paste to use. It's nice and smooth, it's similar to glitter paste, and I'm going to go ahead and just wipe it until it is nice and smooth over top. I'm going to remove my stencil, and I also wanted to mention that I always keep a container full of warm soapy water next to me when I'm working with stencils, so I just throw these in and then I don't have to worry about them getting all gunky. So I've washed my stencil, I've placed it back over top, and I added a second stencil over top. And this way, it's actually keeping everything within the heart. And I am going to be going over top of it using silver glimmer paste this time, so a new color. Don't forget that the pink paste that was put down first should be dry when you're doing this technique. So then you get this really fun looking heart with a lot of detail in it. You get the heart solid glimmer paste as well as the pattern over top. The third technique we have is layer and drag paste. This is really fun to do. Just keep in mind your color wheel so that when you mix the paste you don't get any brown colors. So I'm going to be using this Mandala Burst stencil from Gina K Designs, and I'm using Glacier paste. This paste here is a really smooth, shiny, metallic paste, and it's really pretty. It's one of my favorites in my stash. I'm going to be adding some of this light blue paste here to my stencil. I'm going to be stenciling to approximately halfway down the card. Next, I'm going to be grabbing some silver glacier paste, the same kind of paste, just in a different color, and I'm going to be stenciling the rest of it. You'll notice that I'm not worried about smoothing it out, and a lot of areas have quite a bit of paste on it. And this was done on purpose, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my Stencil Pal tool, and I'm going to be dragging them through each other, these colors. So a couple of areas you can see I have them over top of one another, but you can see I have, especially in the blue color, a lot of areas that are raised. So grabbing my Stencil Pal, I'm going to use the flat edge and I'm going to just go ahead and drag downwards. This is going to drag some of the blue through the silver. Then I can go back up through the top and add some of the silver to the top and drag it through. It's really fun, and you'll get different results every time you do it. Then all you need to do is lift up your stencil, and you can see just how smooth it is. It adds a nice little texture, but it is pretty flat for a paste. And then just let that dry here, and you'll get this beautiful look when it's all done. It's super shiny and pretty. I finished off the stencil by adding a simple hello die cut that has a shadowed black background to it. Now my next technique is called layer and expand. Now a couple of tips and tricks for this one here. So I'm going to be using 2 card panels to get a 2-for-1 card out of this since my stencil is so large. So this is a standard 6x6 stencil, but the solid area is quite large. So what you want to do is you want to place this flat in the center. Now you don't want to have your stencil on an angle at all, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. So what you're going to do is you're going to add your layer. Now this is a really large solid area, so there's no way with my spatulas here that I'm going to get an even coat. So I'm going to use my Stencil Pal here to get that nice even coat and a smooth layer. I'm going to set this off to dry and wash my stencil. Now I'm going to go ahead, when it's all finished drying, I'm going to line up my stencil once again. And you can line up the layering stenciler super easily by simply lining up the stencils together. So all you can do, there's only really 4 possibilities, and if you notice it's not lining up, flip that top stencil over, it's probably on the wrong side. So it's super easy to line up because all you do is line up the edges of the stencil. There's no need to sit there and try and play with the stencil and try to see where the flower fits best. All you need to do is line up the edges and the corners, and it's good to go. So I've added that stencil over top, and I'm now adding some expanding mousse. This is similar to the embellishment mousse we used on the first card, but when heated, this actually expands. In order to get this to work really well, The thicker the paste, the better for this. So the more expansion you want, that's how thick you want it to be. Experiment with it, it's a lot of fun. So I'm going to remove this now, and now I'm going to use my heat tool to expand it. And you'll see here just how fun it looks when it's expanding. It is really fun to just sit here and watch this kind of being raised, and it gets sort of a crusty textured appearance. And as I said, the more paste, kind of the better for more raised texture, depending how you want it. When it's all finished and it's quite dry, you can go ahead and remove that tape off the back here, and you'll have 2 card panels all ready to go for your card. So that's really fun to get a 2-for-1 look. Here's what it looks like nice and close up with the texture on it. And here's what it looks like as a final card, in which I stamped a little thanks there in the corner on both of them. I think they're really, really pretty and elegant looking with that great texture. The 5th technique I'm going to show you today is multicolored die cuts. I have 2 ways to do this depending on your patience level. I know I don't have a lot of patience, so I prefer my 2nd technique here. So keep watching to see what it is. So the first thing you can do is you can make your own glitter cardstock using Glimmer Paste from Tonic Studios. Just add your glitter here onto some white cardstock, and then you can use it as you would normal cardstock. I'm going to take it one step further, and I'm going to be adding 2 different colors here, some silver to the pink. I'm just slowly going over top of them here just to make sure they blend nicely together. Now comes the waiting game. You have to wait for it to completely dry before you die cut it. I'm going to be die cutting a happy birthday sentiment here out of it, and as I said, you have to make sure it's dry before you run this through your die cutting machine. Now the other way to do it, for those that don't have as many patience, I like to do this way. So what I've done is I've die cut it first. This works best on a little bit sturdier of dies, so if it's super intricate, it might not work well. And I just add my Glimmer Paste directly to it using a spatula. I'm working on a piece of copy paper. You can work on a craft mat or a non-porous surface, so you can add any of the excess Glimmer Paste back into your jar if you don't want any waste. That works too. And you don't have to wait as long for it to dry. I find it dries quicker this way, and as well, you can kind of, even if it's just a little bit wet still, you can still work with it and glue it to your surface and everything like that. So I find it just works a little bit quicker and easier this way. Then you can go ahead and you can add this to your cardstock. I like to use a little block here to help everything kind of stay in place and really make sure it adheres nicely. You can see it looks really great on some black cardstock. Here's a final look at that card. So for the most part for these backgrounds, I've just shown you how to do the techniques, but I didn't say much on how I finished off the card. So in about a minute, I'm going to just explain briefly how I finished the cards. So for this one, I added an I miss your face sentiment from Tailored Expressions. This is a rubber stamp in which you stamp everything down at the same time. It's a one-piece stamp. And then you simply use your die cut. One die cut cuts out all these different sentiments. I keep these in a bowl on my table with all the excess sentiments, and then I just pick and choose as I go when I need a quick sentiment for my backgrounds. My hello card, I went ahead and I used a die from the Stamp Market. I die cut it twice and then I layered them together. So this actually coordinates with the stamp, but I just used one of the coordinating dies. For my third card, I have the Happy Birthday in glitter. Once again, I used that Happy Birthday die cut from My Favorite Things. That is absolutely beautiful. For this one here, I used the Super Happy Birthday sentiment from a stamp from Simon Says Stamp. This one here is really cool because it comes with coordinating sentiments that actually die cut your sentiment exactly around the area, not like a simple rectangle or square, so that's super fun. And then for this last card here, once again, I used a thanks stamp. This is from Ellen Hutson's Essential Sentiments set, and I absolutely love this set for